And stop staring at me with them big old eyes.
Arguably the best movie Tim Burton put out in the 2010s, Big Eyes serves as a really nice biopic about a very talented artist and the journey she went through to get the recognition she deserves. Based around the life of the painter known as Margaret Keane, the artist known for those paintings with children who have very distinct eyes, Big Eyes showcase her struggles of being in a toxic marriage, where her husband, Walter, takes credit for all of her hard work. It works as a really interesting biopic on how it really highlights some of the rough patches really talented artists have when their own hard work is taken a back seat by someone who wants all the credit to themselves. A very fascinating and touching true story that felt very appropriate for Burton to tackle, being someone who loves to tackle film about people who are outcasted in any particular way. It is a lot more held back compared to Burton's other work, as we don't get a whole lot of visual flair that we're used to from this director, with the exception of a couple of scenes. Though it's fine to see him hold back considering that this is a more grounded story. And for as much as I love Tim Burton's weirdness, sometimes it's good to see a director go outside their comfort zone. Also helped that the film does have two great leads, with Amy Adams really selling Margaret's shy and introverted nature very well and being very sympathetic. There's also Christoph Waltz, who's always enjoyable to watch him be a slimy bad guy, and here it's no exception, despite a few moments that might have been a bit too over the top for this movie. It also ends on a really good trial sequence that's not only well done, but satisfying to watch after witnessing this person go through so much, and the way they showcase the actual truth of the trial was very telling. Big Eyes is a really good biopic that is one of Tim Burton's more subtle and relaxed films that really is a worthwhile experience, and hopefully we can see Burton do a more reserved movie like this again in the near future. Only downside, it's produced by the Weinstein Company. Other than that, good movie. Let's move on to the next film.
My name, it's pronounced Frankenstein.
While most people would consider Big Eyes to be Burton's best of the 2010s, I think I'm gonna go out on a limb and say that Frankenweenie is underrated as hell. Based on Burton's original short film of the same name, this is essentially a retelling of Frankenstein, but with dogs, and it works quite well. In all honesty, I think it's actually a lot better than the original short film it's based on. Not to say that the short is bad, it's certainly an interesting one in regards to early day Tim Burton. Though it doesn't do as much with this concept compared to the later movie that helped expand it upon it. I partially think it doesn't work for me mainly because, well, the dog isn't scary. Okay, yeah, it's still a kid's film, so you can't make it all that scary, but I don't know, it's just a dog with a few patches on it, and everyone acts like they're terrified of it when I'm just over here being like, why? He doesn't look that beat up or even does that much scary. It's just a dog. Granted, the dog isn't really scary in the new version either, but considering he actually does look a bit more damaged and even get some parts taken off of him at point, I find it a little bit more believable that people are actually scared of him this time around. Not only that, but this is a really neat tribute to the old classic monster movies that I'm glad Burton and company decided to go all out by making it a black and white stop motion animated film in the year 2012 of all things. Outside of the aesthetic, this is also just a really sweet movie about a boy and his dog that manages to be fairly creative. It has its neat set pieces, including a really fun ending climax with a bunch of different monsters. And speaking of which, the monsters and character designs in this are excellent. They all feel very much in line with other Tim Burton movies in terms of how they represent certain characters and monsters archetypes that you would see in a lot of these classic movies. What makes this get the edge over Corpse Bride for me is that this isn't trying to be the next Nightmare Before Christmas, kind of like how Corpse Bride did. This is completely its own thing. That's not a musical, but instead a classic style monster movie made for kids. And I think it's a very sweet little movie that honestly deserves more credit than it got. It might not be quite as strong as recent stop motion affairs from the likes of Leica Entertainment, but it doesn't have to be. It's a unique little stop motion monster movie that has heart and love put into it. Amazing that Tim Burton was able to put both the best and worst movie of the decade within the same year from him. But considering considering this came after Dark Shadows, I'm glad we got to witness Burton's best element of the year 2012. Check this movie out if you have yet to.
What are you?
I'm Batman.
Oh yeah, there was no way I wasn't going to talk about The Dark Knight on this ranking list. The original 1989 Batman is truly one of the most important films of not only Tim Burton's career, but honestly for the entire legacy of this character. Even though the reception of this movie can be a little mixed depending on who you ask. As someone who grew up with this movie, I can definitely see the reasons why there's a love for this film, because this does serve as a great introduction to the character. However, there are definitely aspects that aren't as good as other aspects of this movie that I have been able to see over the years every time I've rewatched this movie. The big form of criticism that this movie gets comes from comic book fans, I've noticed. As while this movie is important to Batman for how it reinvented the character for mainstream movie audiences, some fans don't like the direction that Burton made for this character. It doesn't help that Burton himself, while a big fan of Batman, isn't much of a comic book reader, so he really took the character of Bruce Wayne and made it his own. In a lot of ways, it definitely works, as the character of Batman is done very well from the way he looks, the whole motivation behind his character, and Michael Keaton being phenomenal in this role. It's strange how it is somehow a trend that Batman actors get a backlash when first casted, since Keaton got a lot of crap for being Mr. Mom even before the internet was a part of our culture. Yet, who really cares when he made this character worthwhile just from his performance alone? Ironically enough, the character people tend to have more issues with is the one that seemed perfect for this role, which is Jack Nicholson. It might sound like I hate this version of the Joker, but quite the contrary. This is a really fun version of this character. Nicholson was born to play the Joker. His performance in The Shining is already an amazing version of that character. Though I have noticed, and to some extent agree with some of the criticisms people have with this version of the character. And I say it's not the performance, it's more how the character is written in this movie is why people, including myself, take issues with this version of the character. This movie is practically all about the Joker, and we don't get as much Batman as we would initially expect. It doesn't sound all bad until you realize that maybe they should have gone the other way around, as one of the big appeals about the Joker is the fact that we don't know that much behind him, making him an even scarier villain, where we know so much about the struggles and hardship Batman goes through, making us care more. It still gets a bit of a pass from me, since this is the first major Batman movie taking a more serious approach with the characters, and both actors do a great job, but the emotion of core can feel a little lacking. And since it's from a person who isn't a hardcore Batman fan when it comes to the comics, some big comic book fans could find issue with the liberties Burton made. I myself don't mind, but it's pretty interesting to see that stuff that's a little bit more common in Batman adaptations now that has changed drastically in this movie. Like Joker being the one who killed Batman's parents, not some random crook. It's something that I actually don't mind too much, since it does kind of work for this movie in terms of character motivation, and it's the only movie that really does this for Bruce's parents' death, so I'll let it slide. One thing I can't let slide as well as what does Batman do with his criminals? He just goes on a murder spree with most of them, with no real attempts at saving people. And you guys give Zack Snyder crap for letting Batman kill. So there are those gripes, along with certain characters that are iconic to Batman not really giving much attention here, like Harvey Dent and Commissioner Gordon. Though damn, Billy D would have been a good Two-Face. I'll get to praises of this movie soon enough, as I've given my critiques. But one last thing I do have to criticize is the music. Actually, just the inclusion of Prince. I don't want to rag on the guy too much, since he did unfortunately pass away. And Prince, of course, is a legend in terms of the musical world. But his music contribution don't work for me here. I'm all for 80s style soundtrack, but I think the way this movie set itself out, it doesn't really fit. When we get these pop songs, they just kind of ruin the mood and also go on for a bit too long than needed. as the movie stops to have the Joker dance around to this music. It makes the film a little bit dated and not the best way. However, there's still a ton more good than bad here. And let's actually get to that by starting with the true musical highlight of this film, Danny Elfman. This is not only the main scores that help put him on the map, but it may be the definitive movie theme for Batman. We got a lot of other music themes for Batman in later movies that are neat in their own right, but this theme right here is what I think of when I think of the name Batman. It's so dark, epic, and mysterious that it fits the character perfectly. Why else did they use this theme for Batman the Animated Series? It's that good. The rest of the score is outstanding, and not much else to say except not a complaint, but something I've always noticed. Is it just me, or does the Joker's theme sound eerily similar to a certain underwater theme to a famous video game series? Not to mention, there's a lot of elements that make this movie so memorable, from the atmosphere, the fight sequences, and of course the memorable performances from both Keaton and Nicholson being some of the most memorable versions of these characters. You honestly can't deny how much this movie has benefited Batman for the better by making a relatively dark and serious version of this character, done by a director who did a great job still giving a creative vision. Sure, it doesn't look like it was as much of Tim Burton's creative vision as other projects he would later do, and the comic book inaccuracy can turn some people off, but who really cares? When you get to that ending of them introducing the bat signal with Elfman's score still shining bright, it just feels so right. It might not be the best Batman movie ever made, nor Burton's best movie in my opinion, but for what it did for both of these icons, and how it still holds up fairly well, you can't deny Batman 1989's true impact to the world. Definitely deserves a spot on the best of Burton's work for that alone. And don't forget it.
I believe the word you're looking for is
A bit of a surprise for some, but Batman Returns is honestly the movie I prefer a little bit more than Burton's 1989 original movie. Batman Returns is certainly a sequel I tend to look at that, for while not necessarily a perfect improvement when it comes to being a sequel, it's one that has such an identity and creativeness to it that I end up loving it. Honestly. In this long-awaited sequel, Batman goes up against the Penguin and Catwoman, mixing these two antagonists into one big crazy movie that is the most Tim Burton-esque Batman movie ever made. Burton was given a lot more creative freedom on this movie, and it really shows, as this has more of the craziness and visual spectacle we're used to from Burton. Elfman's score is back, this time with a more mystical choir attached to it, a lot more gothic style in terms of designs, and more themes on being outcasted from society. Right down to the time this movie takes place, as remember when I said Tim Burton didn't work on The Nightmare Before Christmas because he was busy with another project? Well, this was that movie he opted to work on instead. But watching it, you can tell he wanted to retain that Nightmare Before Christmas feel. The whole look of it being a more sinister look taking place on the most wonderful time of the year. How could you not think of Nightmare Before Christmas while watching it? It has since become a popular Christmas movie in the vein of Die Hard, Gremlins, and Brazil. And I'm all the more game for that, though much like the original 1989 version, this isn't a movie without its flaws. Despite Burton having a lot more creative control, this movie doesn't really improve on certain things the original movie had faults with, when it came to adapting the character of Batman. You still get a lot of Batman here, and Michael Keaton is still great, but you don't really get to know him as much in this movie outside of his relationship with Selina Kyle, which this movie heavily focuses on her and Oswald Cobblepot's whole story. And as far as these versions of these characters, they're not the most authentic version of them. They get certain aspects right, like Cobblepot being seen as a freak despite him trying to live a more sophisticated life, and Selina being a very seductive character. But this version of these characters play a lot more of the over-the-top and crazy angle. Catwoman and the Penguin are very eccentric characters here, and that might be a flaw for some. When you compare these characters to how they're portrayed in Batman the Animated Series, the subtlety behind them are pretty much gone. While in that series, there was something clearly wrong with them, they still did their best to maintain a sane nature despite their criminal status. Here, they're very much the basic surface level version of these characters that go very, very over the top, which can be a bit jarring for some fans. For as much as these characters are decent here, they're not the definitive versions in my book. Speaking of books, you might think this might be a little bit more true to Batman and maybe Bruce would ease down on the killing criminal part. Haha, no. If anything, that issue kinda has gotten worse here, with how many times Batman just seems to carelessly have no regard for the criminals. Maybe it's not that bad. I mean, this is the second major live action movie adaptation of this character. That man is dead. So not quite the perfect adaptation of the Caped Crusader. However, I said I liked this movie, didn't I? I do. Because this movie works much better if you look at it as Tim Burton's stylistic interpretation of Batman that's, while style over substance, is a treat to watch. The movie manages to be so creative in terms of its set pieces, with a ton of action and some really neat costumes, animatronics, and set that really give this vision of the character a distinctive voice. And while I do have issues with the main two villains as adaptations, I think what makes up for it for me is how these actors manage to bring these characters to life. Michelle Pfeiffer truly gives it her all, and while she does emphasize more on the craziness of Catwoman, she has so many great moments where she indulges in being this incredibly seductive and sexy character that it's hard not to take your eyes off of her. Literally, actually. I mean, how could you not? I mean, yeah. And who could forget Danny DeVito? How could you watch this movie and say that he's not giving it his all with this character?
I am not a human being! I am an animal! Cold-blooded!
DeVito is really expressive and fun to watch as the Penguin. And even his whole backstory with his parents is again fairly sad and done in a way where Tim Burton really makes this character very sympathetic as this unfortunate outcast who wants back into society. DeVito sells that very well, even if there are some moments that might be a bit too gross for some people with this character.
Your nose could be... What do you mean by that?
Like I said, there's not really a lot of subtlety here. Last I should mention is of course Christopher Walken, and this movie's inclusion of him, as expected, makes it a worthwhile Batman experience.
And Bruce Wayne, why are you dressed up like Batman?
Because he is Batman, you moron.
Overall, I really dug Batman Returns. It is flawed, and again, not a masterpiece, but as far as sequels go, it's one that at least does something unique and fitting for something like a Batman movie from Tim Burton. It's a shame that this movie was considered a disappointment when it came out, since I would have loved to have seen a third movie of this version of Batman. And no, Batman Forever doesn't count, since it's not from Burton, nor does it have Keaton. And it's so far removed from Burton's version that they shouldn't really lump it in with the same series. Burton's version of the character, I say, is about on par with Sam Raimi's Spider-Man movies. They're over the top, and maybe not the 100% definitive version of these characters, but as far as an introduction to these characters go, they work very well at giving newcomers an idea of what a proper superhero movie featuring some of the most iconic heroes of all time should feel like. So they definitely come recommended for being a distinct version of one of my all-time favorite superheroes. Batman Returns is an enjoyable work featuring the Dark Knight from the strange mind that brought you Beetlejuice. Be sure to watch it this holiday season.
Merry Christmas, Mr. Wayne.
Merry Christmas, Albert. Goodwill toward men and women.
There's always a bigger fish.
Big Fish is certainly one of the more subtle and endearing movies of Tim Burton's work. A movie about a son revisiting a lot of the old classic tales that his father, named Edward Bloom, used to tell him as a little kid, and all the value he realizes that he has gotten from those tales. As we see throughout this movie, we witness those tales as being actual accounts of Edward Bloom's life, and they're all recreated thanks to a wonderful performance by Ewan McGregor, who really sells this person as being the very kind-hearted individuals that see the value in those who don't see it themselves, or are rejected by others. It's definitely something that's a staple of Burton films, and what's neat about this one is that it's not extreme with its art direction, as Burton holds it back. Though the film still has a lot of great visuals with some good cinematography, along with some really good set and costume designs, making the tales of Edward Bloom have a ton of personality. It isn't too ridiculously over the top either, and while at times it can come across as schmaltzy for some, it feels more genuine, with all of these stories being very interesting with characters that really did make an impact on Bloom's life. It really does show the impact on what a story can mean to one another, and it all leads to one of the best endings to appear in a Burton film. It's so sweet and so touching, I dare not ruin it here, but it's easily one of the film's biggest highlights for me. Big Fish is a really special movie of Burton's work that is even a good one to watch for those who aren't as crazy about Tim Burton's work. A really nice, genuine film that really captures the importance of storytelling and definitely deserves your time as well. Check it out if you have yet to see it.
Edward Scissorhands, this is Edward Scissorman.
When people think of the creativity and weird combination of dark and whimsical from Burton, Edward Scissorhands definitely comes to mind. Certainly one of the most original films to come out of Tim Burton, as this movie serves as kind of a unique dark fantasy tale about a strange outcast with, well, scissors for hands. It tells the story of Edward learning how to live in normal suburbia, with him helping out others and even having a bit of a romance with Winona Ryder. What makes it stand out compared to other Frankenstein-style stories are numerous things. One of them is being the film's look. This is an incredible looking movie, and it's the first collaboration Burton made with cinematographer Stefan Kapasky. Again, I'm sorry, not really good with pronouncing names, who has shot a ton of films directed by Burton after this. So many great shots in this, and let's not forget the costume and production design. Burton's gothic aesthetic not only looks fantastic here from the architecture and Edward's design himself being very dark and eerie, but the way he makes the suburbia look is very much in line with the overly whimsical and colorful that Tim Burton likes to contrast in a lot of his movies. We also can't forget this film when it comes to Burton working with maybe the most recognizable actor of his work, Johnny Depp. Depp really makes Edward such a likable character, and one of the biggest praises I can give is that he managed to give so much expression and emotion without being reliant on dialogue. This is a very nuanced performance that Depp really sells, with this character being a very shy and quiet individual, but also very friendly despite his threatening appearance. This movie is a quintessential movie of Burton's work, from the look, Depp's performance, the wonderful score, and the whole embracing your own uniqueness and identity, despite it not being the norm that we see so common in a lot of his films. But when done right, it's always charming to see. I can't really say much else about it other than it's a really worthwhile project. And if you still haven't seen Edward Scissorhands, check it out. It's worth your time. Not to mention a great introduction to the iconic duo of both Johnny Depp and Tim Burton. And thankfully, it's not the last we see of this duo, including the next film we are going to talk about here.
At last, my arm is complete again.
Screw you guys. Sweeney Todd and the Demon Barber of Fleet Street is pretty great in all honesty. Somewhat divisive, with people either absolutely loving it and think it's one of Burton's best, along with people who aren't as crazy about his adaptation of the iconic Broadway show. I myself definitely find this to be easily one of Tim Burton's best movies. Not without its flaws, because I can kind of see where people are coming from with their issues with Sweeney Todd. Most of the people I notice who tend to view this film in a negative light are often fans of the original Broadway play. Admittedly, I haven't seen all of the original play just yet, but I completely understand the preference over the film for it. Everything I've seen and heard from the Broadway show is very well done, and it is a show that truly highlights the appeal of big stage musicals, with it being such a grand spectacle from the music and acting performances. Though in regards to Sweeney Todd as a movie, I feel this was a fantastic adaptation. In my opinion, it does a great job utilizing some of the best elements of the play and transforming it into something that makes this a great movie musical, with some aspects that are just exclusive to the movie, namely the look, as this is definitely one of the best looking movies from Tim Burton. It goes all out with making a movie that's 100% gothic, from the sets, costumes, and dark look that fits well for a movie that clearly has some influence on classic gothic horror. It even has a lot of blood, much like Sleepy Hollow, with the violent moments truly being brutal in the mix of a ton of singing. While it doesn't go quite as over the top with some of its comedy, like the play, and arguably is a bit more serious, it still works because of how the core characters and story are still interesting. A barber with a tragic backstory out for revenge is a great concept for a dark, grim horror story, though you wouldn't think that would work well as a musical, but it actually ends up working for the most part. I say for the most part because it has an incredible soundtrack, which granted this movie doesn't own since it belongs to the play, but the way they translate it into the film still works. Starting with the opening, and arguably one of the few issues I have with the music is that there's no ballad of Sweeney Todd. Well, sort of. It appears orchestrated as the opening credits, but the film makes up for not having the lyrics by having a really neat opening credit sequence that sets the mood for this bloody musical tale, and the composition for it is outstanding. They went all out, making this music sound grander than it ever had before, and it adds this epic feeling that this musical really needed. In all honesty, it helps that the songs themselves are great to begin with, as this soundtrack has a ton of great memorable songs, ranging from light and fun to dark and sinister. Songs like No Place Like London, Pretty Women, and Epiphany, along with so many other fantastic tracks. But I guess I gotta address the one elephant in the room when it comes to the music, and that's the singing.
You are young, life has been kind to you.
I'll be the first to admit, yeah, it's far from the best I've heard. There are a couple of moments where Depp and Carter sound a bit off-key, but you know, it doesn't bother me that much. I say the main reason is because, honestly, the performances are still great and work really well for this movie. Depp doesn't quite go as over the top as the original play actor, but you can still feel the inner rage this character has throughout the entire movie and feel for his tragedy that was bestowed upon him. A good performance can still be good even if the singing isn't perfect, and that's how I feel about Depp here. Plus, in terms of recent modern musicals, there have been so much worse. Much worse.
Little town full of little people.
The rest of the actors are also great in this movie, being very appropriate for their characters, from Carter as Mrs. Lovett, the late great Alan Rickman as Judge Trubin, and who can forget Borat himself, Sacha Baron Cohen as Mr. Pirelli, who has a great song, even if I can only think of King Julian from Madagascar singing this song whenever I hear him sing. If you haven't watched the play, this serves as a fantastic introduction to it. Though this isn't to say that people shouldn't prefer the play over the movie, cause I totally get it. The original play might have a little bit more substance and aspects that makes it work as a stage musical better. But I think the talent shown by Burton and his team here should not go uncredited. It's kind of how I feel about Scott Pilgrim when talking about the comics versus the movie, where the books are arguably better, and I can't deny the people who may prefer it, but the way it's translated into film by a very talented artist that helped brought more attention to the original source material should at least get some credit, especially for how well both of these movies are done. And in the case of Sweeney Todd, it's by far one of Burton's absolute best films in my opinion, for how it brings new light to one of the most critically acclaimed Broadway shows out there. Now how about a shave before the next film on our countdown?
Good morning, Pee-wee. Good morning, Mr. Breakfast.
Yeah, how could you not like Pee-wee's Big Adventure? The movie that really brought Tim Burton's career on the map, as his first time directing gig was one that doesn't seem like his alley at first. Pee-wee is such a crazy over-the-top character with his show, and the lighthearted nature of it doesn't seem like Burton's thing at first. Though, Burton makes this movie rather whimsical, but in his own strange, darkly comedic sort of way. When the movie gets crazy, it managed to be very creative with its characters and set pieces. The film has plenty of classic comedic moments that are highly quotable, and honestly isn't afraid to get Burton demented in some areas. I mean, who could forget Large Marge and the infamous whatever that is? The movie is ultimately really charming, with Paul Reubens portraying the childlike innocent of Pee-wee in an endearing sort of way, to the point where it doesn't come across as annoying, unlike a lot of other childlike characters in the past. The finale chase sequence at the Warner Brothers Studios is easily a highlight, and the movie is very self-aware, being kind of this live-action cartoon that doesn't take itself that seriously. There's not really a whole lot else to say about this movie, other than it's the main film that really helped bring Tim Burton's career together. It's not as dark or as gothic, but it doesn't need to be. It managed to be so much fun with some good performances and a great score by Danny Elfman that sometimes you kind of like seeing Tim Burton do something a little bit more comedic and silly like this. Pee-wee's Big Adventure is one of the films that really helped pave the way for a great future for this first-time director. Yeah, if it wasn't for Pee-wee, we probably wouldn't have some of the really great movies that we got from Tim Burton later on, including the next film, which is easily the bigger contribution into making Tim Burton the director he is today, and that being
Beetlejuice, Beetlejuice, Beetlejuice.
It's showtime.
More than Pee-wee's Big Adventure, this is the film that really escalated Burton into mainstream popularity. Beetlejuice is quintessential Tim Burton and still holds up well as one of his best. This strange movie might be a comedy, but it's filled with fun spooks, really creepy and creative designs, and an edge that can only be found in the 80s. Hell, arguably more so with this movie having the balls to have a PG-rated F-bomb.
Nice fucking model!
Though, there's a likable charm to it, as it has a pretty out there concept for a comedy. A couple gets tragically killed only to become ghosts, and when a new family moves into their home without permission, they start to haunt the place. The only issue is that the new family kinda admires this new haunted house, so the couple gets the help of the one and only Beetlejuice to really give them a scare. A fun concept, and this film utilizes very well, though one odd thing about it is that Beetlejuice himself doesn't come into the film until about a half hour in, which sounds like that could be false advertising, but they make up for it by really setting up this story well, by making us really connect to this couple and their frustration, and more importantly, having the movie become a strange, crazy experience with a ton of imagination once Beetlejuice comes into frame. It's creative with how it uses Burton's great designs, and Michael Keaton kills it in every scene. It might be a little bit till he actually comes in, but once he does, he proves to everyone that, yeah, you don't have to worry about Mr. Mom playing as Batman, because this is easily one of Keaton's most versatile and memorable roles. This movie has everything: rad stop motion, creepy aesthetics, funny characters, Harry Belafonte music, Winona Ryder playing as a goth, who may or may not be an early day celebrity crush for yours truly, and so much more. I think everyone appreciates this movie to some capacity, as it has made quite an impact over the years. From merchandise, a cartoon show, cameo appearances, a Broadway show, and even a potential sequel that has been rumored for years. Who knows if that sequel will actually become a reality, but how the original stands on its own as this one unique film from the 80s, it might be for the better. Regardless, Beetlejuice is every bit of a Tim Burton experience that is an absolute blast to watch, especially during the Halloween season. Absolutely a great movie to add to Tim Burton's filmography, and maybe the best one if it wasn't for the #1 movie on our countdown, which just so happens to be...
Can your heart stand the shocking facts of the true story of Edward D. Wood Jr.?
Ed Wood is without a doubt the best movie to come from Tim Burton in my honest opinion. This is everything that works so well about Burton's other movies, but not only is it at its best, but it feels the most personal. The story about famous and rather infamous director Edward D. Wood Jr., the man behind such classic films as Bride of the Monster, Glen or Glenda, and Plan 9 from Outer Space, some of the most critically panned movies of all time. Yeah, before Derek Savage, before Neil Breen, or even Tommy Wiseau, Ed Wood was the pioneer of directors known for movies that are so bad they need to be seen to be believed for how hilarious they are. This movie doesn't shy away from him being perceived as one of the worst directors, as this showcased Wood's entire career and the amount of hard work that he went to bringing these otherwise horrible movies into existence. But what makes the character so admirable, despite his lack of talent, is how much admiration he had for his work, to where he wanted to be remembered for the things he did. Yeah, they were ultimately bad, and Wood made a ton of mistakes leading to their quality, but the fact that he managed to do so much and without that much help from the studio is a miracle within itself. The movie really celebrates his work, not just because over time people saw the appeal of his movies, but just for how he was able to bring them to life despite what everyone else said. And he made them because he was really passionate about the work he did. It shows that even if you're not as talented as other filmmakers, that doesn't mean that the work you put into your films should not go unnoticed. Burton realizes that so well with Ed Wood, and it also helps that the movie has so much more of his style while also respectfully discussing Ed Wood's life. To have this movie be black and white was a brilliant move, as this movie doesn't just look like a movie from that time period, but it also helps replicate the look of the movies Wood himself would take influence from. It looks gorgeous and almost exactly like the classic black and white monster movies that Wood would have loved. Easily the best cinematography to ever appear in a Tim Burton movie, and unlike a lot of Burton films, it holds back from being really surreal and bizarre. But for the benefit of this story, Burton knows where to keep the focus on, with the whole story of Wood being so fascinating, and what also helps is the incredible cast that was put together. This is possibly my favorite movie featuring Johnny Depp. And while he doesn't have any extravagant costumes, doesn't play it crazy, over the top, or sing, he manages to convey the passion Wood had for his work so magnificently. Depp still is super expressive when wanting to get these projects done, even if he becomes very naive and a little clueless while making them, but in a strangely charming way that only Johnny Depp can pull out. The rest of the cast is also fantastic, with the true highlight being the late Martin Landau as Bela Lugosi. Even though he might go a little overboard with the swearing at points, which is kind of unknown if Lugosi actually used that much foul language, but Landau makes up for it by capturing the true demeanor that Bela Lugosi was known for, feeling more like the actor himself rather than just an impersonation of him.
Beware of the big green dragon that sits on your doorstep.
He also manages to sell the performance very well during the more dramatic moments, as this movie doesn't shy away from the tragedy the real actor went through with his drug addiction. Landau sells it very well to make us believe that Bela Lugosi is really struggling with this addiction, despite his amazing talent. It's a performance so good, he even won an Oscar for Best Supporting Actor of that year, and rightfully so. This is by far the best performance I've seen in any Tim Burton movie. As a result, Tim Burton's retelling of the life of Ed Wood is a remarkable film that is everything you want from a Tim Burton movie and more. If you have yet to see this movie, Tim Burton fan or not, give it a watch. It highlights the absolute best of his work. Tim Burton is a talent that does an amazing job at not being afraid to embrace the strange and weirdness that not a lot of mainstream filmmakers were able to convey prior to him. A talent that really emphasizes what makes you unique, even if it's outside of what's traditionally seen as normal. No movies really captured that as well as Ed Wood, and I think Tim Burton was able to capture that so well with his experience as a filmmaker. And if nothing else, this is one of those movies, along with so many others, that make you truly remember the creativity and vision that can be brought from a filmmaker, especially one that's unique and unlike anything else from the likes of Tim Burton, managing to combine the whimsical and dark into one of the most personal films I have ever seen about what makes even the weakest of art so special. So take that for what it's worth.
This is the one. This is the one I'll be remembered for.